The suds burned her cracked hands as Hannah Kimball plunged another plate into the scalding water. But she barely noticed any more, because pain had become as constant as breathing in the 3 years since she had arrived at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house in Bonanza, Colorado. The summer of 1882 had settled over the mining town like a wool blanket, thick and suffocating. And through the kitchen window, she could see the dusty street where miners and cowboys passed by without ever glancing toward the plain young woman who scrubbed their dinner plates until her fingers bled. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, worn down to nothing by the endless cycle of cooking and cleaning for strangers who treated her like part of the furniture, invisible and unremarkable. "Hurry up with those dishes," Mrs. Patterson's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "The evening crowd will be here soon, and I need you to start on the potatoes." "Yes, madam," Hannah said quietly, scrubbing harder at a stubborn bit of dried gravy. The water had gone gray and cold, and she dumped it into the slop bucket before hauling in fresh water from the pump in the yard. Her arms ached from the weight of the bucket, from the endless repetition of tasks that never seemed to end. Wake before dawn, prepare breakfast for 20 boarders, clean the dishes, scrub the floors, prepare lunch, clean again, prepare dinner, clean again, collapse into bed in the tiny room under the stairs that she shared with the other hired girl, then wake and do it all over again. She had come to Bonanza from Kansas when she was 19, following her aunt after her parents died of fever. The aunt had died 6 months later, leaving Hannah alone in a strange town with no money and no prospects. Mrs. Patterson had offered her a position that was barely better than indentured servitude, but Hannah had been desperate and grateful for even that small mercy. Now, 3 years later, she wondered if she would die in this kitchen, her hands in dishwater, having never known anything else. The evening rush began as miners trudged in from the hills, their faces black with ore dust, their voices loud and rough. Hannah kept her head down as she moved between the kitchen and the dining room, setting out platters of beef and potatoes, refilling coffee cups, collecting empty plates. She had learned to make herself small, to move like a shadow, because some of the men had wandering hands and Mrs. Patterson would blame Hannah if there was any trouble. It was during this evening service that she first noticed him. He sat alone at a corner table, and unlike the other men, he was clean, his dark hair neatly combed back, his face freshly shaven. He wore a brown leather vest over a blue shirt, and his hat hung on the back of his chair. He was probably in his mid-20s, with strong features and dark eyes that seemed thoughtful rather than hard. When Hannah approached to pour his coffee, he looked up at her and smiled. "Thank you kindly," he said, and his voice was warm, genuine. Hannah nodded without speaking and moved away quickly, but she felt his gaze follow her. It made her uncomfortable, not because he seemed threatening, but because she was not used to being seen. She tried to put him out of her mind as she returned to the kitchen, but twice more during the meal she caught him watching her, and each time he looked away quickly as if embarrassed to be caught staring. After the dinner service ended and the last boarder had wandered off to the saloon or to bed, Hannah returned to the kitchen to face the mountain of dirty dishes waiting for her. She filled the sink with hot water, added soap shavings, and began the familiar ritual. Her back ached and her feet throbbed, but she worked steadily, lost in the rhythm of wash, rinse, dry, stack. "Excuse me, miss." Hannah jumped, nearly dropping the plate in her hands. She turned to find the dark-haired cowboy standing in the kitchen doorway, his hat in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to startle you. I just wanted to ask if I could trouble you for another cup of coffee." "The kitchen is closed," Hannah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I can get you some from the pot in the dining room." "I'd be much obliged," he said, and waited while she dried her hands and led him back to the dining room. Her heart was beating strangely fast, though she could not say why. She poured him a cup from the pot that sat warming on the sideboard, and he thanked her again. "My name is Daniel Briggs," he said. "I just arrived in town yesterday." Hannah nodded but did not offer her own name. It did not seem proper to stand here conversing with a boarder, and Mrs. Patterson would scold her if she caught them talking. "I'm looking to hire someone," Daniel continued, turning the coffee cup in his hands but not drinking. "A housekeeper, I suppose you would call it. I have a ranch about 10 miles north of here, and it's gotten to where I can't manage the house and the work both. I was wondering if you might know anyone who would be interested in such a position." Hannah stared at him, not understanding why he was telling her this. "I don't know anyone, sir. I'm sorry." "What about you?" he asked, and his dark eyes met hers directly. "Would you be interested?" The question was so unexpected that Hannah could only blink at him. "Me? I know it's forward of me to ask," Daniel said quickly. "And I know we've only just met. But I watched you tonight, working so hard, and you seem like a good, honest person. The ranch house is small but comfortable, and you would have your own room. I'd pay you $20 a month plus room and board, and you would only have to cook and clean for one person instead of 20. $20 a month." Hannah made $8 a month at the boarding house, and half of that went back to Mrs. Patterson for her room and meals. She felt dizzy at the thought of such wealth, but also deeply suspicious. Men did not offer women positions like that without expecting something in return. "It would be proper," Daniel said, as if reading her thoughts. "I would arrange for a preacher to marry us first if you were willing. I know that might sound strange, but I'm tired of living alone and I need help with the house, and I thought maybe we could help each other. You would be my wife in name and have all the respect that comes with that. Anything else would only happen if you wanted it to in time. I'm not looking to force anything on anyone. I just want a partner, someone to build a life with." Hannah's mouth had gone dry. Marriage. He was proposing marriage to a woman he had just met, a woman who was nothing special, plain and worn down by hard work. It had to be a cruel joke, or a trap, or something dangerous. And yet, when she looked into his eyes, she saw only sincerity and perhaps a loneliness that matched her own. "I don't know you," she whispered. "That's true," Daniel agreed. "But I'm willing to take time for us to know each other if you are. I'm staying here at the boarding house for the next few days while I conduct some business in town. Perhaps we could talk, get acquainted, and you could decide if you would be willing to take a chance on me. If you decide against it, I'll respect your decision and never bother you again." "Why me?" Hannah asked, the question bursting out of her before she could stop it. "You could find someone prettier, someone educated." Daniel smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and almost boyish. "I don't care about pretty. I care about good, and I can see you're good, right down to your bones. That's worth more than all the prettiness in the world." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, though she could not have said why. No one had ever called her good before. No one had ever looked at her the way this stranger was looking at her, like she mattered, like she was worth something. "I have to finish the dishes," she said finally, her voice shaking. "Of course," Daniel said. "I'll let you get back to your work, but please think about what I said. I'll be at the table by the window for breakfast tomorrow if you want to talk more." He left then, and Hannah stood alone in the empty dining room, her mind reeling. She returned to the kitchen in a daze and mechanically finished the dishes, but her thoughts were far away, tumbling over themselves. A ranch. Her own room. $20 a month. A husband. The possibility of a life that was not this endless, grinding servitude. It was too good to be true. It had to be. And yet, some small, desperate part of her whispered, "What if it's not?" She barely slept that night, lying on her narrow cot while the other hired girl snored softly beside her. She kept thinking about Daniel Briggs and his unexpected offer. She knew nothing about ranching, nothing about keeping house for just one person instead of a crowd. She knew nothing about marriage or being a wife. The thought terrified her, but so did the thought of spending the rest of her life in Mrs. Patterson's kitchen, her hands raw and bleeding, invisible to everyone around her. By the time dawn broke, Hannah had made her decision. She would talk to him at least. She would learn more about this offer and about the man making it. And if it seemed safe, if it seemed real, then maybe, just maybe, she would take the biggest risk of her life. Breakfast service was chaos as always, with hungry men shouting for more coffee, more bacon, more biscuits. Hannah moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, but her eyes kept darting to the table by the window where Daniel sat, eating quietly and reading a newspaper. He did not try to catch her attention or wave her over, and she appreciated his discretion. When the rush finally slowed and most of the men had left for the day's work, she approached his table with a fresh pot of coffee. "May I sit down for a moment?" she asked quietly. "Please do," Daniel said, folding his newspaper and giving her his full attention. Hannah sat on the edge of the chair across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I want to know more about your offer, about the ranch, about what you would expect from me." "That's fair," Daniel said. "What would you like to know?" "Everything," Hannah said. "Start at the beginning." So he did. Daniel told her he was 26 years old, originally from Texas. He had come to Colorado 5 years ago and had worked as a ranch hand for various outfits before saving enough to buy his own small spread 3 years back. He ran about 50 head of cattle and some horses, and he had plans to expand gradually. The ranch house was modest, just 3 rooms, but it was sturdy and well built. He had no family in the area, his parents having died when he was young and his only sister married and living back in Texas. "Why haven't you married before now?" Hannah asked, studying his face for signs of deception. Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I was engaged once, back in Texas when I was 21. Her name was Sarah. She died of cholera 2 weeks before our wedding. After that, I couldn't stay there anymore. Everywhere I looked reminded me of her, so I came here to start over. I've kept to myself mostly, focused on building the ranch. But lately, the loneliness has gotten to be too much. The house feels empty. My life feels empty. I want a family, someone to share the work and the rewards with." There was pain in his voice when he spoke of Sarah, old pain that had settled into something bearable but not forgotten. Hannah found that she believed him, believed in his grief and his loneliness because she recognized it in herself. "I don't know anything about ranching," she admitted. "I grew up in a town, and I've worked in boarding houses and hotels since I was 16. I can cook and clean and sew and do laundry, but I don't know about cattle or horses or any of that." "You don't need to," Daniel assured her. "I handle all the ranch work. I just need someone to manage the house, to cook meals, to keep things tidy. The same work you do here, just for one person instead of 20. It would be easier work, Hannah, with more freedom and more respect." He had used her name, though she had not given it to him. She raised her eyebrows in question. "I asked Mrs. Patterson about you," he admitted. "She said you're a hard worker, reliable and honest. She also said you have no family and no prospects, which is why I thought you might be willing to consider my offer." Hannah felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. No family and no prospects. That summed up her life quite neatly, did it not? She was nothing and no one, which made her desperate enough to consider marrying a complete stranger. "I'm sorry," Daniel said quickly. "That came out wrong. I didn't mean to embarrass you. What I meant is that we're both alone, both trying to build something out of nothing. We could help each other. You would have security and a home of your own. I would have a partner and companionship. It seems like it could be a good arrangement for both of us." "An arrangement," Hannah repeated. "Is that what a marriage should be?" "I don't know," Daniel said honestly. "I've never been married, but I figure it's better to be honest about expectations from the start rather than pretending this is some great romance. Maybe in time it could become something more, or maybe it would just be a partnership. Either way, you would be treated with respect and kindness. That I can promise you." Hannah looked down at her hands, at the rough, reddened skin and the broken nails. She thought about the life stretching ahead of her if she stayed here, years and years of the same drudgery until she was too old and broken to work anymore. Then what? The poorhouse. Begging on the streets. At least Daniel's offer provided a different future, a possibility of something better. "I want to see the ranch," she said finally. "Before I give you my answer, I want to see where I would be living." "Of course," Daniel said, his face lighting up with hope. "I could take you there tomorrow if Mrs. Patterson can spare you for the day. We could leave after breakfast and be back before dark." "I'll ask her," Hannah said, "but I can't promise she'll agree." Mrs. Patterson did not agree, at least not at first. She turned red-faced and sputtered about ungrateful girls and abandonment when Hannah timidly approached her with the request. But when Daniel himself came to speak with her, offering to pay double for Hannah's room and board for the week he was staying in town, the older woman's tune changed. She gave Hannah the day off, though she made it clear she expected her back in time to help with dinner. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of summer day that made the mountains stand out sharp and blue against the sky. Daniel brought a wagon around to the front of the boarding house, and Hannah climbed up beside him, her heart pounding with nervousness and excitement. She had not been more than a block away from the boarding house in months, and the freedom of heading out into the open country made her feel almost giddy. They drove north out of Bonanza, following a well-worn trail that wound through sage-covered hills. Daniel kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the area. He was easy to talk to, Hannah discovered, with a dry sense of humor and an obvious love for the land. He talked about his plans for the ranch, how he wanted to build up the herd slowly and maybe add some sheep in a few years. He spoke of improving the house, adding on a proper bedroom and maybe a front porch where they could sit in the evenings. "You like to read?" he asked at one point. "I do," Hannah said, "though I haven't had much time for it lately. Mrs. Patterson doesn't approve of hired girls wasting time on books." "I have some books at the house," Daniel said. "Not many, but a few. You would be welcome to read whenever you wanted. And when I go into town, I could get more from the general store if you told me what you liked." The simple kindness of the offer brought tears to Hannah's eyes. When was the last time anyone had cared about what she liked or wanted? She could not even remember. The ranch appeared as they crested a hill, and Hannah caught her breath at the sight. It was nestled in a valley between two ridges, with a creek running through the property and cottonwood trees providing shade. The house was small, built of logs with a stone chimney, but it looked solid and welcoming. There was a barn, a corral with several horses and cattle grazing in the distance. It was not grand or impressive, but it was peaceful, beautiful in its simplicity. Daniel helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the house. "It's not much," he said, suddenly sounding nervous, "but it's home." Inside, the house was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the bright sunshine outside. Hannah looked around, taking in the main room with its stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a few other basic furnishings. Through an open door, she could see a bedroom with a large bed covered by a faded quilt. Another door led to what appeared to be a small storage room. "The bedroom would be yours," Daniel said quickly. I've been sleeping there, but I could move into the other room. It's small, but it would work. Or we could partition the main room and I could sleep there. Whatever would make you most comfortable." Hannah walked slowly through the space, running her hand along the table, the back of a chair, the mantel above the fireplace. Everything was dusty and disorganized, with dirty dishes stacked in a basin and clothes draped over chairs. It was the house of a man living alone, without a woman's touch to make it a home. But she could see the potential. With some cleaning and organizing, some curtains on the windows and a cloth on the table, it could be quite pleasant. "The well is just outside the back door," Daniel continued, following her. "And there's a root cellar for storing vegetables and preserves. The garden is overgrown right now, I'm afraid. I haven't had time to keep up with it, but the soil is good and it produces well when tended properly." Hannah moved to the window and looked out at the view, the rolling hills and distant mountains. She thought about waking up to this view every morning, about keeping house in this peaceful place instead of in the chaotic boarding house. She thought about having her own space, her own bed, time to read and think and breathe. "I'll do it," she said suddenly, turning to face Daniel. "I'll marry you." Daniel's face lit up with joy and relief. "Truly, you're sure?" "I'm sure," Hannah said, and realized it was true. This was a gamble, yes, but it was a gamble worth taking. Anything was better than the life she was leaving behind. "We could go to the preacher tomorrow," Daniel said eagerly. "Get married quickly and then you could move out here right away. Unless you want to wait, have a proper courtship." "No," Hannah said firmly. "Let's do it quickly before I lose my nerve." They spent the rest of the day at the ranch, with Daniel showing Hannah around the property and introducing her to the horses. She was nervous around the large animals at first, but Daniel was patient, showing her how to approach them and stroke their noses. He pointed out where the chickens roosted, explaining that they provided eggs and sometimes meat. He took her down to the creek where cold, clear water tumbled over smooth stones. "It's beautiful here," Hannah said, standing on the creek bank and watching the water flow. "Peaceful." "It is," Daniel agreed, standing beside her. "I hoped you would think so." They returned to Bonanza in the late afternoon, and Hannah felt her spirits sink as the boarding house came into view. Soon she would be back in that hot kitchen, back to the endless dishes and the dismissive treatment. But not for long, she reminded herself. Just a little longer and she would be free. The next day passed in a blur. Daniel went to speak with the preacher at the small church on the edge of town while Hannah worked through her morning tasks in a daze. She told Mrs. Patterson she would be leaving, and the woman responded with a mix of anger and indifference. Hired girls came and went. Hannah would be replaced within a week. That afternoon, Hannah put on her only good dress, a plain gray cotton that was faded but clean, and met Daniel at the church. The preacher was a thin, elderly man who looked at them with some skepticism, but agreed to perform the ceremony. He asked them each in turn if they took the other as their lawful wedded spouse, and they both answered yes in voices that shook slightly. There were no rings, no flowers, no guests. It was brief and businesslike, but when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Hannah felt something shift inside her, a sense of possibility opening up. Daniel paid the preacher, and they walked back to the boarding house together to collect Hannah's belongings. Everything she owned fit into a single battered carpet bag. 2 changes of clothes, a hairbrush, a small Bible that had been her mother's, and a few other small items. It was pathetic how little she had accumulated in 22 years of life, but Daniel did not seem to notice or judge. He simply carried the bag to the wagon and helped her up onto the seat. They drove out of Bonanza as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Hannah looked back once at the town, at the boarding house where she had spent 3 miserable years, and then faced forward, toward her new life. She was Mrs. Hannah Briggs now, married to a man she barely knew, heading toward a future that was utterly uncertain. She should have been terrified, but instead she felt oddly calm, as if some part of her had known all along that this was meant to happen. Night had fallen by the time they reached the ranch, and Daniel lit lamps inside the house to push back the darkness. He had cleaned while Hannah was at work that day, she noticed. The dishes were washed, the table cleared, the floor swept. The bedroom door stood open, and she could see fresh sheets on the bed. "I'll sleep out here," Daniel said, gesturing to a bedroll he had laid out near the fireplace. "You take the bedroom. In the morning, I'll start building a partition or figure out something more permanent." "Thank you," Hannah said quietly. She felt awkward and uncertain, unsure of what was expected now. They were married, but they were also strangers, and the situation felt strange and surreal. "Are you hungry?" Daniel asked. "I made some stew earlier. It's not very good, but it's edible." They ate together at the table, making stilted small talk about the journey and the ranch. After dinner, Hannah insisted on washing the dishes, needing the familiar task to ground herself. Daniel stayed in the main room, giving her space, and when she finally retreated to the bedroom, he wished her a simple good night. Hannah lay in the big bed, staring up at the ceiling in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night. Crickets chirped, a cow lowed in the distance, and she could hear Daniel moving quietly in the other room. She had done it. She had left the boarding house, married a stranger, and started a new life. She had no idea if it would work out, but at least she had tried. At least she had taken a chance on something better. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, Hannah slept more soundly than she had in years. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm, different from the boarding house, but just as busy in its own way. Hannah woke with the sun and started coffee brewing while Daniel went out to tend to the animals. She made breakfast, and they ate together before Daniel headed out for his day's work. Then Hannah set about cleaning and organizing the house, which desperately needed a woman's attention. She scrubbed floors and washed windows, beat the dust out of the quilts and curtains, and organized the kitchen so that everything had its proper place. She found the overgrown garden and spent hours pulling weeds and salvaging what vegetables she could. Daniel had been right about the soil being good. Once cleared, she could see tomatoes, squash, and beans thriving despite the neglect. In the evenings, Daniel would return tired and dusty, and they would eat dinner together. The meals were simple, nothing like the elaborate spreads at the boarding house, but Daniel always thanked her and complimented her cooking. After dinner, they would sit by the fireplace, even though it was summer and they did not need the heat, and talk. Sometimes Daniel read aloud from one of his books, and Hannah would listen while she mended clothes or did other handwork. It was peaceful, comfortable in a way that surprised her. Slowly, carefully, they learned about each other. Daniel told her more about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride and rope from his father, about the grief of losing his parents and then his fiancée. Hannah shared stories of her own childhood in Kansas, the happy years before her parents died, and the difficult years after. She told him about the boarding house, about Mrs. Patterson's harsh treatment and the loneliness of being invisible. "You're not invisible," Daniel said firmly when she finished. "I see you, Hannah. I see how hard you work, how you've transformed this house in just a week. I see your kindness and your strength. You matter." Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes at his words. "Thank you," she whispered. A month passed, then two. Summer faded into early autumn, and the days grew shorter and cooler. Hannah settled into her new life with a sense of contentment she had never known before. The work was still hard, but it was different working for herself, for her own home and husband. She took pride in the way the house looked now, clean and organized with touches of beauty like wildflowers in a jar on the table and curtains she had sewn for the windows. Daniel had built a partition in the main room, creating a small bedroom space for himself so that Hannah could keep the larger bedroom. But increasingly, Hannah found herself wishing the wall was not there, wishing there was less distance between them. She had married Daniel out of desperation and convenience, but over the weeks, her feelings had shifted and deepened. She enjoyed his company, looked forward to their evening conversations, and found herself noticing things about him that made her heart beat faster: the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to the animals. She was falling in love with her husband, she realized one evening as she watched him read by lamplight. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. What if he did not feel the same? What if he only saw her as a housekeeper, a convenient arrangement and nothing more? But there were signs that suggested Daniel's feelings were changing too. The way he looked at her sometimes, with warmth and something deeper. The way he found excuses to touch her hand or stand close to her. The way he brought her small gifts when he went to town: a length of pretty fabric, a new book, a hair ribbon. One evening in late September, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Daniel set down the book he had been reading and looked at her seriously. "Hannah, I need to tell you something," he said. Hannah's heart jumped with nervousness. "What is it?" "These past 2 months have been the happiest of my life," Daniel said. "Having you here, talking with you, sharing meals and work and quiet evenings, it's made me realize what I've been missing. You've made this house a home, but more than that, you've brought joy into my life that I didn't think I would feel again after losing Sarah." "Daniel," Hannah began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said. "I know we married for practical reasons, as an arrangement more than anything else. But my feelings have changed, Hannah. I've come to care for you deeply, and I think I'm falling in love with you. I needed you to know that, even if you don't feel the same way. I won't pressure you or expect anything from you. I just wanted to be honest." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of happiness. "I feel the same way," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been falling in love with you too, Daniel. I was just afraid to say anything." Daniel's face transformed with joy, and he crossed the space between them, kneeling beside her chair. "Truly?" he asked, taking her hands in his. "Truly," Hannah said, and then he was kissing her, gently at first and then with increasing passion. Hannah kissed him back, pouring all of her feelings into it, all of her hope and love and gratitude for this man who had given her a new life. That night, the partition between their rooms no longer mattered. Hannah and Daniel became husband and wife in truth, not just in name, and it was tender and sweet, and everything Hannah had never dared to hope for. Afterward, lying in Daniel's arms in the big bed, Hannah felt a profound sense of belonging. This was her home. This was her husband. This was her life, and it was good. The seasons turned and winter settled over the ranch. Snow covered the ground and ice formed in the water trough, but inside the house, there was warmth and love. Hannah and Daniel grew closer with each passing day, learning each other's habits and preferences, building a partnership that went far beyond their original arrangement. They worked together, planned together, dreamed together. Daniel taught Hannah to ride so that she could accompany him around the ranch. She was nervous at first, afraid of falling, but with his patient instruction, she learned to sit a horse and even to enjoy it. They would ride out together to check on the cattle, and Daniel would point out different features of the land, talking about his plans for the future. "I'd like to build a bigger house someday," he said one clear winter morning as they sat on their horses overlooking the valley. "Something with a proper parlor and multiple bedrooms. Multiple bedrooms, Hannah asked, smiling. How many do you envision needing? Daniel grinned at her. Well, I'm hoping we'll have children eventually if the Lord wills it. We would need bedrooms for them. Children. The idea made Hannah's heart swell. She had not let herself think much about children, had not wanted to hope for too much. But now that Daniel had mentioned it, she could not stop imagining it, a baby, maybe several. The house filled with the sounds of laughter and little feet running. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like that very much. Winter passed into spring, and with the warming weather came new life. The cattle gave birth to calves, the horses to foals, and Hannah discovered she was pregnant. She told Daniel one evening in April, nervous about how he would react, but he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. We're going to have a baby, he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. We're going to be parents. He became even more attentive after that, insisting Hannah rest more and not work too hard. She found it both endearing and slightly frustrating because she was not an invalid, merely pregnant. But she loved him for his concern, for the way he would place his hand on her still flat belly and talk about the future. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into summer. Hannah's belly grew round, and she had to let out her dresses. Daniel built a cradle in his spare time, carefully sanding and smoothing the wood until it was perfect. They prepared the small storage room as a nursery, and Hannah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. In late September, a year and a few months after their wedding, Hannah went into labor. Daniel rode to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Hannah thought she could not bear it. But Daniel stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and encouraging her. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born. He was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair like his father's, and he was the most beautiful thing Hannah had ever seen. Daniel wept when Mrs. Henderson placed the baby in his arms, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son. He's perfect, Daniel whispered. Absolutely perfect. They named him David, and he became the center of their world. Hannah had never known she could love something so much, this tiny person who depended on her for everything. The sleepless nights and constant demands were exhausting, but she would not have traded it for anything. Daniel was a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he was not working, rocking David to sleep while singing off-key lullabies that made Hannah smile. Life fell into a new rhythm with David. The work was even busier now, but it was a good kind of busy, full of purpose and love. Hannah would strap David to her back while she worked in the garden or did laundry, talking to him constantly even though he was too young to understand. Daniel would take him out to the barn sometimes, introducing him to the horses and cattle, telling him that someday this would all be his. 2 years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. David grew into a sturdy toddler, always into everything, exploring his world with fearless enthusiasm. Daniel expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and building a new barn. Hannah kept the household running smoothly, managing everything from cooking to preserving food for winter to tending the garden that now produced an abundance of vegetables. They were prospering, not wealthy by any means, but comfortable and secure. Daniel sometimes talked about hiring help, a ranch hand to assist with the work, but Hannah always discouraged it. She liked their privacy, their little family unit, and the independence they had built together. When David was 2.5, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was less nervous and more simply happy. David would have a sibling, someone to play with and grow up with. Daniel was delighted, already making plans to expand the house further. "We're going to need more space," he said, looking around the house that had once seemed adequate but now felt cramped with a toddler's toys and clothes everywhere. "I'll start working on an addition this fall, get it ready before the baby comes." True to his word, Daniel spent every spare moment that autumn and winter building onto the house. With the help of a few neighbors, he added 2 rooms, creating proper bedrooms for the children and more living space for the family. It was hard work, especially with the ranch to run at the same time, but Daniel was determined to finish before the baby arrived. In early March of 1885, Hannah gave birth to their second son. This one had an easier birth than David, arriving quickly after only a few hours of labor. They named him Daniel Jr., though everyone called him Danny from the start. He was smaller than David had been, with lighter hair and blue eyes that eventually changed to match Hannah's brown ones. With 2 small children, life became even more chaotic and demanding. Hannah sometimes felt overwhelmed, juggling the needs of a newborn and an energetic toddler while still trying to keep the house and help where she could with the ranch. But Daniel was her partner in every way, taking on as much of the childcare as possible, never complaining about sleepless nights or the changes to their peaceful evenings by the fire. "I wouldn't trade this for anything," he told her one night as they finally collapsed into bed after getting both boys to sleep. "Even when I'm so tired I can barely see straight, I'm happy, Hannah. Happier than I ever imagined I could be." "Me too," Hannah said, snuggling against him. "I never dreamed I could have a life like this. Sometimes I think about that night at the boarding house when you offered me a home, and I can hardly believe how everything has changed." "You took a chance on me," Daniel said, kissing the top of her head. "You were brave enough to leave everything you knew for an uncertain future. I'll never stop being grateful for that." "We took a chance on each other," Hannah corrected. "And look what we built." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. David grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, absorbing knowledge about ranching and animals. Danny was more quiet and thoughtful, but just as sweet, with a gentle nature that reminded Hannah of her own father. When David was 5 and Danny was 3, Hannah gave birth to their third child, a daughter they named Hope. Hope was tiny and delicate, with blonde hair and features that favored Hannah's side of the family. She was also colicky, crying for hours at a time, and those first few months were exhausting for everyone. But she eventually grew out of it and became a sunny, cheerful child who brought light and laughter to the household. Daniel had continued to expand the ranch over the years, and by 1887, they ran over 200 head of cattle and had built a solid reputation for quality livestock. They were no longer struggling to make ends meet. They were prosperous, with money saved in the bank and plans for the future. Daniel had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and Hannah had a girl from town who came twice a week to help with the heavy cleaning and laundry. The house had grown too, with Daniel adding on as needed. It was now a proper 2-story structure with a wide front porch where they would sit in the evenings, watching the children play in the yard. It was not grand or fancy, but it was comfortable and welcoming, a true home. Hannah sometimes thought about her life before, the years of loneliness and drudgery at the boarding house, and it felt like a lifetime ago, like it had happened to a different person. That Hannah had been invisible, worn down without hope. This Hannah was a wife, a mother, a partner in a thriving ranch. She was seen, valued, loved. The transformation still amazed her sometimes. One evening in late summer, after the children had been put to bed and they sat together on the porch watching the sun set, Daniel took her hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying me so quickly, taking such a risk?" Hannah looked at him in surprise. Never, she said firmly. Not for a single moment. Why would you ask that? I just want to make sure you're happy, Daniel said. That this life, this ranch, is what you want. Sometimes I worry that you miss town life or other women's company or things I can't give you out here. Hannah squeezed his hand. Daniel, look at me. I have never been happier in my entire life. This ranch, our children, this is everything I never dared to dream of. I don't miss anything about my old life because this one is so much better in every possible way. I love you, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. More now than ever. You've given me so much, Hannah. A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning with joy. I love you too, Hannah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Thank you for offering me a home all those years ago. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for giving me this life. They sat together in the fading light, comfortable in each other's presence after years of marriage, still in love, still partners. The children's laughter drifted from inside the house where David and Danny were supposedly going to sleep, but were obviously still playing. Hope's baby sounds came from her cradle near the window, and smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of the bread Hannah had baked that morning. It was an ordinary evening, nothing special or dramatic, but it was perfect in its ordinariness. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had built together from nothing, from a chance meeting and an unlikely offer, and two people desperate and brave enough to take a risk. The years continued, bringing both joys and challenges as all lives do. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to cold and starvation. There were droughts when the creek ran low and the grass turned brown. There were illnesses and injuries, frightening moments when one of the children fell sick or Daniel was hurt working with the horses. But through it all, Hannah and Daniel faced everything together, their partnership stronger with each passing year. When Hannah was 32, she gave birth to their fourth and final child, another son they named Henry. By then, David was 10, Danny was 8, and Hope was 5. The older children were fascinated by their new baby brother, taking turns holding him carefully and fighting over who got to help feed him. David, especially, took his role as oldest seriously, always watching out for his younger siblings with a protectiveness that made both Hannah and Daniel proud. The ranch continued to prosper. Daniel had become one of the most respected ranchers in the area, known for his fair dealing and quality livestock. He served on the town council and was often asked for advice by younger ranchers just starting out. Hannah had her own reputation as an excellent cook and a skilled seamstress, and she often helped out other families in times of need, just as they had helped her over the years. Bonanza itself had grown considerably since Hannah first arrived. The town now boasted a proper church, a schoolhouse, a bank, and several stores. The mining that had sustained the town in its early years had mostly played out, but ranching and farming had taken over, creating a more stable, permanent community. Hannah went to town once a week now for supplies and to visit with other women, friendships she had developed over the years. She was no longer invisible and alone. She was Mrs. Briggs, wife of Daniel, mother of 4, a respected member of the community. The children grew as children do. David showed an aptitude for ranching that delighted Daniel, and by the time he was 15, he was handling much of the ranch work himself. Danny surprised them all by developing a love of books and learning, and Daniel and Hannah decided to send him to a school in Denver for a better education when he was 17. Hope was bright and spirited, with a gift for music that had them saving up to buy a piano that she practiced on for hours every day. And Henry, the baby, was growing into a sturdy, cheerful boy who loved both ranching and learning, unable to choose between his oldest and second brother's paths. Hannah turned 40 in the summer of 1900, and Daniel threw a party for her, inviting half the county. It was a warm, beautiful day, and the ranch was filled with people, food, laughter, and music. Hannah stood on the porch watching everyone celebrate, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for the abundance of her life. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked, coming to stand beside her. He was 44 now, his dark hair threaded with gray, lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. But to Hannah, he was as handsome as the day she first saw him in the boarding house dining room. "I'm thinking about how far we've come," Hannah said. "Do you remember what I told you once? That I was nothing and no one with no family and no prospects?" "I remember," Daniel said, slipping his arm around her waist. "Look at this," Hannah said, gesturing to the crowd of people, their children, the ranch spread out around them. "Look at what we built from that nothing. We created family, prospects, a whole life. It's miraculous." "You were never nothing," Daniel said firmly. "You were always remarkable. You just needed someone to see it. I'm just grateful I was the one who got to." Hannah turned to kiss him, not caring that people might be watching, wanting him to know how much she loved him, how much all of this meant. When they pulled apart, David was grinning at them from across the yard. "Get a room, you two," he called out, and everyone laughed. "Don't be disrespectful to your mother," Daniel called back, but he was smiling. Their children had grown up seeing their parents' affection, knowing they were loved not just individually, but as part of a family built on love and respect. It had given them a foundation that Hannah hoped would serve them well throughout their lives. As the party continued into the evening with dancing and more food and children running wild in the twilight, Hannah felt a profound sense of peace. This was her life. These were her people. This land, these buildings, this family, all of it had come from a single brave decision 18 years ago, when she had taken a chance on a stranger who offered her a home. She had washed dishes at a boarding house, invisible and hopeless. A cowboy had offered her a home, a partnership, a chance at something better. She had taken that chance, and it had led to this, to love, to family, to a life richer than she ever could have imagined. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. The party eventually wound down and people headed home, calling out thanks and goodbyes. The children, exhausted from the excitement, were herded off to bed. Finally, Hannah and Daniel were alone again on the porch, sitting in the chairs they had occupied countless evenings over the years. "Happy birthday, my love," Daniel said, taking her hand. "Best birthday ever," Hannah replied, meaning it. "Thank you for everything, Daniel, for seeing me, for choosing me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for saying yes," Daniel said, "for being brave enough to take a chance on me. Everything good in my life came from that moment when you agreed to come see the ranch. I won't ever forget that." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one, their hands linked, their hearts full. Behind them, the house was quiet now, their children sleeping peacefully in their beds. The ranch slept too, the cattle settled, the horses dozing in their stalls. Everything was as it should be. Hannah thought about the future, about watching her children grow into adults, about becoming grandparents someday, about growing old together on this land they both loved. She thought about the past too, about the scared, lonely girl she had been and the long journey to becoming the woman she was now. Every hardship, every moment of despair had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life. It had been worth it, all of it. Every painful step had brought her home. As they finally stood to go inside, Daniel paused and pulled Hannah close, kissing her tenderly. "I love you, Hannah Briggs. Today, tomorrow, always." "I love you too," Hannah whispered against his lips. "Thank you for giving me a home." Thank you for giving me everything." Hand in hand, they walked into their house, closing the door on another day of their life together. Outside, the night settled over the ranch, peaceful and quiet. The stars shone bright in the clear Colorado sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The creek continued its eternal song, flowing over rocks worn smooth by time. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had built from nothing but hope and courage and love. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 20 more years would pass. Hannah and Daniel would watch all their children grow to adulthood and start families of their own. David would take over the ranch, expanding it even further. Danny would become a teacher, returning to Bonanza after his schooling to run the town's school. Hope would marry a rancher from a neighboring property, her piano music filling her own home with beauty. And Henry would become a veterinarian, tending to animals throughout the county. Hannah and Daniel would become grandparents many times over, their house once again filled with the sound of children's laughter during visits. They would celebrate 50 years of marriage with a party even bigger than Hannah's 40th birthday, with children, grandchildren, and friends gathering to honor their enduring love. Daniel would pass away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 71, leaving Hannah heartbroken but grateful for every moment they had shared. She would live another 5 years, surrounded by her family, still sharp and engaged until the very end. When she died at 76, her children would gather to remember a woman who had transformed from an invisible servant into the matriarch of a large and loving family. The ranch would stay in the family, passing from generation to generation, but the house itself would always be considered special. It was where Hannah and Daniel had built their life, where they had raised their children, where they had loved each other through decades of marriage. Their story would become family legend, told and retold the story of a woman washing dishes at a boarding house and a cowboy who offered her a home, and how that simple offer had changed everything. But on this night, as Hannah and Daniel climbed into bed together after her 40th birthday party, none of that future was known. They only knew that they were here together in the home they had created. They knew they were loved and had built something lasting. And as they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, they were content. The moon rose higher, bathing the ranch in silver light. In the children's rooms, David, Danny, Hope, and Henry slept peacefully. In the barn, the horses shifted in their stalls. In the fields, cattle grazed under the stars. And in the master bedroom, Hannah and Daniel slept, their breathing synchronized after years of sleeping side by side, two hearts beating as one. This was the life that had started with a simple question. Would you be interested in such a position? This was the family that had grown from a chance taken, a risk embraced, a hope fulfilled. This was home, built not with wood and nails but with love, trust, and the courage to believe in possibility. Outside, the Colorado night sang its ancient song. The mountains stood eternal, witnesses to countless lives and loves. The creek continued to flow, marking time in its endless journey. And in the small ranch house in the valley, Hannah and Daniel Briggs dreamed together of tomorrow, secure in the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together, as they had faced everything with love, with partnership, with the unbreakable bond they had forged from that first improbable meeting so many years ago. The story that had begun in a boarding house kitchen, with raw hands and desperate hopes, had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. From invisible servant to beloved wife and mother, from lonely cowboy to devoted husband and father, they had traveled a remarkable journey together. And though challenges would come and eventually time would claim them both, the love they built would endure, living on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that bore their mark, in the legacy of courage and hope they left behind. This was their story, simple and profound, ordinary and miraculous. The story of how an offer of a home became an offer of love, and how that love built a family, a legacy, and a life worth living. It was the story of Hannah and Daniel, two lonely souls who found each other in the vast wilderness of the American West and created something eternal from their union. And it all started with dishes in a boarding house kitchen and a cowboy brave enough to offer a stranger a home. The end came peacefully for both of them, years apart but reunited in memory and in the hearts of those who loved them. Their graves lay side by side in the small cemetery outside Bonanza, under cottonwood trees Daniel had planted himself decades earlier. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and the dates that marked their time on Earth. But nearby was a bench that their children had installed, where grandchildren and great-grandchildren would come to sit and remember. The ranch thrived under David's care and then under his children's care, the land cared for with the same devotion Daniel had shown. The house was eventually expanded and modernized, but the original rooms were preserved, kept as they had been when Hannah and Daniel lived there. Family members would walk through those rooms and feel the presence of their ancestors, the love that had filled those spaces. Hope's piano eventually came to rest in that original part of the house, and visiting grandchildren would play it, keeping music alive in the walls that had heard Hannah humming while she cooked and Daniel singing his off-key lullabies. The cradle Daniel had built for David was passed down through generations, rocking baby after baby to sleep, a tangible connection to the family's beginning. Danny's children would find the books their grandfather had treasured, including the ones he had read to his own children, and they would read them to their children in turn. The family Bible that had belonged to Hannah's mother, the one thing she had carried from her old life, remained on the mantle, recording births and deaths and marriages, a growing testament to the family that had sprung from one woman's courage. Henry's veterinary practice was eventually taken over by his son, and then his grandson, the care of animals remaining in the family, a reflection of the ranch heritage that had started it all. The Briggs name became synonymous with integrity and quality throughout Colorado, respected and trusted. But beyond the success and prosperity, beyond the acres and the cattle and the growing family tree, the real legacy of Hannah and Daniel was simpler and more profound. They had taught their family about love, about the courage to take chances, about the value of hard work and partnership. They had shown that it was possible to build something beautiful from nothing, that love could grow from the smallest beginnings. That home was not just a place, but a feeling created by the people in it. Their great-grandchildren would hear the story and marvel at how it all started: a young woman in a boarding house kitchen, worn down and hopeless, and a cowboy who saw something in her that no one else had seen. They would hear how that single moment of recognition, of offering and accepting, had led to all of this, to them, to the family, to the legacy that continued. On summer evenings, when the family gathered at the ranch for reunions, they would sit on that porch where Hannah and Daniel had sat so many times, and they would look out at the same mountains, the same valley, the same stars. They would feel connected to their past, grateful for the courage of two people who had taken a chance on each other and built something that lasted beyond their lifetimes. The creek still flowed through the property, its song unchanged by the passing years. The cottonwood trees grew tall and strong, providing shade for children who played beneath them, just as David, Danny, Hope, and Henry had played. The land remained beautiful, cared for by people who understood its value, who knew they were stewards of something precious. And in the quiet moments when the wind whispered through the grass and the sun set in a blaze of glory over the mountains, it was easy to imagine Hannah and Daniel there still, their spirits forever tied to the land they had loved, the family they had created, the life they had built together. Easy to imagine them sitting on that porch, hands linked, faces turned toward each other with love and contentment. Their story was complete, their journey finished, but the impact of their lives rippled outward through time, touching everyone who came after them. The girl who had been invisible became the foundation of a family, the center of a legacy. The cowboy who had been lonely became a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, his influence living on in the values he had passed down. This was the power of love, of taking chances, of offering and accepting hope. This was what could be built when two people committed to building together, when they chose partnership over pride, love over fear, courage over comfort. Hannah and Daniel's story proved that the smallest moments could have the largest consequences, that a simple offer of a home could change everything. And so their story ended as all stories must, with death and remembrance, with legacy and continuation. But it ended well, with love fulfilled, with promises kept, with a life lived fully and without regret. They had found each other when both were lost, had built a home when both were homeless, had created family when both were alone, from dishes in a boarding house to a thriving ranch. From strangers to soulmates, from nothing to everything. That was the journey of Hannah and Daniel Briggs, and it was a journey worth remembering, worth honoring, worth telling to each new generation so they would understand that love was always possible. That home was always within reach, that courage was always rewarded. Their story was complete, and it was beautiful.